The moment you realize silence is power. Before you learn how silence becomes a weapon, you have to remember the moment you felt powerless. The moment you wanted to explain yourself, to defend your intentions, to prove you weren't weak, to make them understand. And they didn't listen. That feeling, when words fail, when explanations collapse, when the more you talk, the smaller you feel. That is where silence is born. Silence is not absence, it is presence, unseen yet undeniable. Most people think silence is what happens when you have nothing to say. They're wrong. Silence is what happens when you finally understand that words are currency and you've been spending them cheaply. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one tells you. The world does not respect those who explain themselves too much. It studies them, measures them, learns how to control them. Every justification reveals fear. Every over-explanation leaks insecurity. Every emotional reaction hands over leverage. Silence keeps leverage. There's a real example most people overlook. Think about powerful figures, not the loud ones, not the ones constantly tweeting, reacting, defending, but the ones who say almost nothing. In high-stakes negotiations, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, even in criminal interrogations, the person who speaks last usually wins. Why? Because silence forces the other side to fill the void, and people reveal more when they're uncomfortable than when they're confident. A former FBI interrogation trainer once revealed something chilling. They were taught not to pressure suspects with words, but with silence. After a question, they would simply wait. No threats, no follow-ups, no explanations. And eventually, the suspect would speak. Not because they had to, but because silence felt heavier than confession. This doesn't just happen in interrogation rooms. It happens in friendships, when someone expects a reaction and doesn't get one. In relationships, when emotional control suddenly shifts. In workplaces, when you stop over-justifying your decisions and let your actions speak. Silence rewrites the power dynamic. At first, silence feels like weakness. Your heart races, your mind screams for release. You want to correct the story, to protect your image. But then, something changes. People start leaning in. They start wondering. They start projecting. And projection is power handed to you freely. Because when you stay silent, you are no longer reacting. You are observing. And observation is the first step toward dominance. This is not about being cold. This is not about being cruel. This is about understanding that silence creates gravity, and everything with gravity pulls others toward it. In the next chapter, we'll explore why silence makes people fear losing you, and how that fear quietly bends behavior without you saying a single word. Because once you understand silence, you are never truly powerless again. Why silence makes people fear losing you. There's a strange panic that settles in when someone who used to react suddenly doesn't. Not anger, not confrontation, not explanation, just silence. And that silence doesn't feel empty. It feels intentional. Because it is. Here's what most people never realize. The moment you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And when you stop being predictable, people lose control over you. That loss of control registers in the human brain as danger. Human beings are wired for patterns. We learn how much we can say, how far we can push, how little we can give, based on reactions. Your reactions train people how to treat you. Silence untrains them. Let's ground this in something real. There's a well-documented shift that happens in social dynamics when one person emotionally withdraws. In attachment psychology, it's called the withdrawal effect. But in power dynamics, it's something darker. Think of a relationship, romantic or otherwise, where one person suddenly stops explaining themselves. No arguments, no emotional speeches, no desperate attempts to be understood. Just calm distance. What happens next is almost always the same. The other person starts reaching. They ask questions they never asked before. They replay old conversations. They overanalyze tone. They imagine worst-case scenarios. Not because you said something wrong, but because you said nothing. Here's a real historical parallel most people miss. In ancient diplomacy, the most feared response was not refusal. It was delay. Kings who remained silent after receiving demands forced their enemies into uncertainty. Was the request ignored? Was retaliation coming? Was the silence strategic? That uncertainty caused more anxiety than an outright no. Silence creates a psychological vacuum, and the human mind hates vacuums, so it fills them with fear, with assumptions, with self-doubt. Most of it self-inflicted.
This is why silence makes people fear losing you. Not because you threaten them, but because you stop reassuring them that they still matter. Reassurance is addictive. When you constantly explain yourself, you're saying, "Please don't misunderstand me. Please don't leave. Please stay comfortable." Silence says something else entirely. It says, "I am not afraid of your absence." And that sentence, never spoken, is terrifying. Here's the uncomfortable shift that follows. When people fear losing you, they don't chase with love. They chase with compliance. They soften their tone. They adjust their behavior. They give more. Not because you demanded it, but because silence forced them to confront a possibility they were avoiding. A world where you no longer revolve around them. This is the quiet paradox of power. The less you beg to be understood, the more valuable your presence becomes. And the less you fear being alone, the more others fear losing you. In the next chapter, we'll expose how silence turns emotional restraint into psychological control, and why disciplined quiet outperforms confrontation every time. Because silence doesn't chase power. It makes power come to you. When emotional restraint becomes psychological control. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when silence stops being restraint and starts becoming control. Not control through force, not through fear, not through words, but through emotional discipline. And discipline is what separates the powerful from the reactive. Most people believe control means dominance, raised voices, clear demands, aggressive posture. But real psychological control doesn't announce itself. It watches. Here's the truth most never face. The person who can regulate their emotions in a tense moment controls the outcome. Because emotions are the levers of behavior, and silence keeps those levers hidden. Let's look at a real example, one that unfolds every day in modern power structures. In high-level corporate negotiations, the most effective leaders speak less than everyone else in the room. They let others argue, they let others defend, they let others expose urgency. And then they respond calmly, selectively, without emotion. One former Fortune 500 executive once admitted something revealing. He said the fastest way to lose leverage was to reveal how badly you wanted the deal. So he trained himself to remain silent when pressure peaked. Not because he didn't care, but because caring too loudly gave others control. Silence does something subtle in the brain. When someone provokes you and gets no reaction, they feel exposed. Their emotional investment is suddenly unbalanced. This is where control quietly shifts. The reactive person starts second-guessing themselves. Was that too much? Did I miscalculate? Did I reveal weakness? While the silent one observes. This dynamic has existed for centuries. Ancient generals understood this well. Before major battles, some commanders refused to respond to taunts. No speeches, no insults, no visible emotion. And that silence unnerved their enemies more than threats ever could. Why? Because emotional restraint signals self-sufficiency. It says, I do not need to react to remain in control. And that message travels faster than words. This applies beyond battlefields. In personal conflicts, the moment you stop defending your character, you force others to defend theirs. Silence becomes a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. They reflect insecurity, they reflect intention, they reflect motive, without you saying a single thing. Here's the dangerous part most people misunderstand. Silence is not passive. It is active restraint, a deliberate choice to not give emotional access to those who haven't earned it. When you master this, arguments lose their grip. Manipulation loses its hooks, because there's nothing to pull on anymore. Only stillness. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how silence redraws emotional boundaries and why people who once overstepped suddenly learn restraint without being told. Because silence doesn't just protect you, it reshapes how others approach you. How silence redraws emotional boundaries. Boundaries are rarely announced. They're felt. And nothing defines a boundary more clearly than silence. Because silence removes access without asking permission. It doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It simply closes the door. Most people fail at boundaries because they explain them too much. They justify, they soften, they apologize. And in doing so, they teach others where the boundary can be crossed. Silence teaches the opposite lesson. Let's bring in a real, lived example. Think of someone who used to overstep, interrupting your time, questioning your choices, demanding emotional labor. At first, you explained, you reasoned, you tried to be understood. Nothing changed. Then, you stopped engaging. No arguments, no long messages, no emotional reactions, just distance. What followed wasn't anger, it was adjustment. Because people don't respect spoken boundaries, they respect enforced ones. And silence is enforcement without confrontation. It removes reward. Psychologically, this is powerful. When behavior is no longer rewarded with attention, emotion, or reaction, it fades. Silence starves entitlement. This pattern appears in history as well. Certain monarchs and leaders rarely responded to criticism, not because they didn't hear it, but because responding validated the challenge. Silence signaled that the challenge wasn't worthy of the throne's attention. And that message spread faster than punishment ever could. People adjusted behavior to avoid being ignored, not to avoid being punished. That distinction matters. In personal life, silence redraws emotional boundaries the same way. When you stop reacting to disrespect, you don't tolerate it, you make it irrelevant. And irrelevance is the strongest boundary of all. This is where many people break. They fear being misunderstood, they fear seeming cold, they fear being labeled distant. But boundaries aren't built to be liked, they're built to protect. Silence protects energy, it preserves dignity, it communicates self-worth without explanation, and self-worth needs no announcement. Here's the quiet transformation. When your boundaries become silent, people begin to approach you differently. They ask before they take, they pause before they push, they think before they speak. Not because you warned them, but because experience taught them. In the final chapter, we'll reveal the ultimate transformation, when silence stops being a tactic and becomes your identity. Because when silence defines you, power follows you everywhere. When silence becomes who you are. At some point, silence stops being something you use and starts becoming something you are. Not forced, not rehearsed, not performative. Natural. This is the final shift most people never reach. They learn silence as a tactic, when to speak less, when to withhold reaction. But they never let it reshape their identity. Because that requires giving up validation. When silence becomes part of you, you no longer rush to be understood. You no longer explain your absence. You no longer correct every assumption. You let people believe what they need to believe. And that freedom is intoxicating. Here's a real example that captures this transformation. Some of history's most powerful figures were described the same way. Difficult to read, impossible to predict, unmoved by pressure. Not because they were emotionless, but because they mastered restraint. One ancient philosopher was once asked why he spoke so little. His response was simple: I observe more than I reveal. That single sentence contains an entire philosophy of power. When silence defines you, people stop testing you. They stop pushing boundaries. They stop seeking reactions. Because there's nothing to gain, no emotional payoff. This is the final layer of control. You're no longer reacting to the environment. The environment adjusts to you, quietly. Silence changes how you walk into a room. You're not scanning for approval. You're not filling gaps with noise. You're present, grounded, contained, and presence is felt before it's noticed. Here's the truth most never accept. People project power onto what they cannot read. Mystery invites respect. Restraint invites curiosity. And curiosity keeps people cautious. When silence becomes your identity, you don't dominate conversations. You dominate attention. Because when you finally speak, people listen. Not out of obligation, but anticipation. This is not about manipulation. It's about alignment. Your inner state no longer depends on external noise. And independence is the deepest form of power. You started this journey feeling unheard, feeling small, feeling reactive. And now you understand something rare. Silence was never weakness. It was always the weapon you hadn't learned to hold yet. And once you do, no one can take it from you.